22. It's Wednesday. We're in the week on culture war. Just a couple of quick reminders as I get started. There is a quiz tomorrow. It actually covers a number of weeks worth of material, really since the midterm. But because of that, it'll continue to be the same length, and we'll try and kind of stick with main concepts, main themes you should have been picking up through the weeks. One other reminder too is that we're getting near the end of the semester, and it seems like it's a perfect natural time for people to kind of tail off, to get too busy, to not complete assignments, to kind of even give up. And I would just encourage you, don't do that. I'm always surprised when I do final grades in a class how often just one missed assignment, especially at the end, just kind of giving up near the end of a course can really affect a grade and kind of be the difference between bumping you between one grade and another. So I really encourage you to stick with it. And again, make sure to get in touch with me sooner than later if you have any questions or problems. Well, we've been doing a number of different themes the past couple of weeks, covering actually quite a bit of terrain. And for today's lecture, basically kind of intro the culture war concept given what we've been studying. I'm going to talk about the culture war concept. I'm going to talk about the specific culture war argument, and then going to go to some of your comments. The critical reading assignments and the discussions for the most part have been really interesting recently. The discussions last week on the Pledge of Allegiance, I really enjoyed reading, and I didn't produce an extra lecture on that. It was meant as kind of this kind of case study, if you will, of putting the civil religion idea to use, and what can be the upsides and downsides of not the concept of civil religion, but how actually a country such as the United States may engage religion, and what it might not mean, but what it may mean problematically for both a country and nation state, as well as religious groups in that country. So you guys did some really good jobs there, and some really interesting replies this week in your critical reading assignments to the culture wars argument, which I find one of the most kind of fascinating sociological arguments about religion really in the last 20 years. So let me start with kind of the prep, the intro here, and kind of reframe the last 2 weeks of the class that we've done. Now, when we had that week on church and state relationships, well, I want to remind you that what we were really talking about there, even though we were reading about the founding fathers, if you will, kind of the processes of the Continental Congress, what we were really looking at were what are the nature of institutional relationships between state bodies and between quote-unquote church bodies in the United States of America. And we basically concluded by looking at the historical context of how the clauses were written in the Constitution, and then also what those clauses, how they've been kind of applied and reapplied all the way up to today. We basically determined that there's really an ongoing boundary definition struggle, if you will, between state actors and between church or religious actors, and that the nature of the institutional relationship, at least as it is in law in this country, in addition, or that the nature of that relationship kind of frees both of those different players, state players and religion players, to continue to try and renegotiate and engage that boundary. So we're really looking at institutional relationships when we're talking about church and state. And then when we were talking about civil religion, what we were talking about there was really an analytical concept, especially portrayed by Robert Bellah, where he tries in a very Durkheimian way to make sense of United States history, to make sense of the rituals, the beliefs, the meanings of the United States. And one of the things that he struggles with to show is that civil religion exists for any state entity, or so we could look at Yugoslavia, Rwanda, China, whatever it is, and using a Durkheimian sense, we would be able to come up with kind of an analytical civil religion of those nation states. But the interesting trick in the United States is that religion in and of itself, in terms of religious traditions and religious groups, has always been a big part of the U.S. historical experience. So the United States version of civil religion actually interweaves or intertwines some what we would usually call more overt kind of religious ideas and religious themes. And what's important to remember coming out of the Civil Religion Week is that Bella's not saying that civil religion is the official religion of the United States. No, he's using it as an analytical concept to make sense of these moments and of these meanings and of these rituals throughout U.S. history. What I've discovered in reading your comments was that many of you maybe got a little confused on that and started to think that what civil religion really referred to was some sort of tradition that the founders started. Well, the founders did start a tradition in kind of a broad, kind of democratic sense. Many of you talked about the quote from Rousseau that kind of said, well, in a general, broad sense, early on in the founding of the United States, there was a general kind of willingness to believe in God, and there are also some general kind of democratic and liberal principles early in that founding. But that having kind of those principles that were just as much kind of political or government oriented, having those is not the same thing as saying there was a civil religion that was founded at that time. So Bella is really looking back as a sociologist back at history and saying, how do we make sense using the tools of Emile Durkheim and everything that he says about religion to understand the meanings and the themes of the United States throughout history. So I just wanted to kind of tweak that and make sure you understood that. Now this week, so we moved from kind of the church state where we look at institutional relationships to civil religion, where we're using kind of the sociological concept to basically make sense of the meanings and of the rituals of a nation state. This week we turn more towards religious groups and individuals, so more toward what one might expect you would study when you say something like we're studying religion. What we're looking at this week with the culture war is how they engage society, how religious groups mobilize, and how religious groups understand differences on important social issues of the day. Today, in this lecture, we're taking the culture war argument seriously, looking at the evidence, taking it at face value, while on the readings for tomorrow and then the last lecture of the week, we'll raise the question of, is it a useful theory? And actually, many of you raised that question in your critical reading assignments and did a very good job raising it, both in terms of the method that our author used in talking about culture war, but just in kind of the bigger question of like, is there really a culture war, as James Davison Hunter argues it? So, to jump into the culture war concept, I actually want to make a distinction, and I realized I forgot my eraser. Well, we'll make do with the fingers this time around. Sorry about that. So what Hunter, I'm sorry, let me stop there for a second and say, we want to think of culture war in two ways. One, as an analytical concept, but like many analytical concepts, even like the analytical concept civil religion, this concept has now had a life of its own in the last 20 years, and it's actually become a mobilizing theme or strategy. So let me take these one at a time to explain to you. So the roots of the analytic concept are from this famous book. Published in 1990, Culture Wars, the struggle to define America, making sense of the battles over the family, art, education, law, and politics. And then throughout the book, he has a chapter on basically each of those topics. But we read kind of the core theoretical chapter where he really lays out his main arguments. What he was trying to do is he, as it says in the title there, he was trying to make sense of what he saw as conflicts, for the most part, conflicts in kind of legal arenas, political campaigns, or just in the discourse of various